The room was quiet, almost too quiet. A single scientist stood alone in a small laboratory, staring at a screen filled with moving lines and blinking numbers. He had run this experiment many times before. Every step was familiar, every setting carefully chosen. There was nothing new about it, or so he thought. The experiment was simple. Send tiny particles through a narrow opening. Do not look at them directly. Just record what happens. At first, the results seemed normal. The particles behaved like soft waves, spreading out, overlapping, acting as if they were everywhere at once. This was strange, but expected. Physics had accepted this for years. Then the scientist changed one thing. He decided to measure the particles, to observe them, to watch what they were doing. The moment he did, everything changed. The waves disappeared. The particles snapped into clear positions. They behaved like solid objects, as if they suddenly knew they were being watched. The scientist frowned. He checked the machine. He checked the numbers. He checked himself. Nothing was wrong. The only difference was observation. He repeated the experiment again and again. Each time, the same strange pattern appeared. When no one looked, reality acted one way. When observed, it acted another. This was not supposed to happen. The scientist leaned back, feeling uneasy. If observation could change the outcome, then the experiment was no longer separate from the observer. The act of watching was not passive, it was active. He had always believed that reality existed on its own, independent, stable, waiting to be discovered. But now, that belief began to crack. What if reality did not fully exist until it was observed? The question stayed with him long after he left the lab. He noticed it everywhere, in the way people behave when they were watched, in the way silence felt different when someone was paying attention. He wondered if the universe itself reacted the same way. The narrator slowly guides the audience into his thoughts. This was not just a physics problem. It was a question about existence itself. If particles change when observed, what about thoughts? What about choices? What about life? The scientist began reading late into the night. Old papers, strange theories, forgotten ideas. Some physicists said measurement alone caused the change. Others whispered that consciousness played a role. That word made him pause. Consciousness. Was it possible that awareness itself had power, that simply paying attention shaped what was real? The idea felt uncomfortable, almost dangerous, if observation mattered. Then humans were not just observers of the universe, they were participants. The narrator lets the silence stretch. Because this idea changes everything. If reality depends on being observed, then what happens when no one is looking? Does the universe still exist the same way, or does it remain unfinished, waiting? The scientist returned to the lab the next morning, but now he felt different. He no longer saw the machines as neutral tools. They were part of a larger question. He realized that science had opened a door it could not easily close, a door that led beyond numbers and equations, into philosophy, into consciousness, into the nature of reality itself. The story pauses here, holding the viewer in that question. Are we simply watching the universe, or is the universe responding to us? And if observation changes reality, what happens when you realize this? The scientist stood in the lab again, but now the room felt different. The machines were the same, the lights were the same, yet something invisible had changed. He was no longer just running an experiment, he was testing reality itself. This time, he slowed down. He watched every detail, every signal, every delay, every tiny shift in the data. The particles were released once more. When they were not measured, they spread out like waves, soft, uncertain, almost unreal. They did not choose a single path. They explored all paths at once, as if reality itself could not decide what it wanted to be. Then the measurement device turned on. The change was instant. The waves collapsed. The many possibilities became one clear result. The particles behaved as if they had made a decision. The scientists felt a chill. It was not just strange. It was deeply unsettling. Reality was acting like it was waiting for a question, waiting for attention. He compared the results carefully. Observed versus unobserved, watched versus ignored. The difference was undeniable. This was not a mistake, it was a pattern. The narrator explains it simply, in the smallest parts of the universe. Things do not behave like solid objects. They exist as possibilities, as chances, as maybes. Only when measured do they settle into something real. The scientist struggled with this idea, because it went against common sense. In everyday life, Things exist, whether anyone looks or not. A chair does not disappear when you leave the room. A mountain does not change shape because no one is watching, or so it seems. But deep down, at the foundation of reality, the rules are different. The scientists began to wonder, if the universe behaves this way at its core, could the solid world be built on something uncertain? Could reality be more like a question than an answer? He imagined the universe before life existed, before eyes, before minds, before observers. Was it still behaving like waves, floating in endless possibility? Or did observation begin long before humans appeared? Some theories suggested that interaction alone caused the change. That measurement devices forced particles into position, no mind required, but other theories were harder to ignore. They suggested that information mattered, that knowing mattered, that awareness played a role. The scientist did not accept these ideas easily. He was trained to trust math, not mystery. Yet the data kept pointing in the same direction. Reality was not fully formed until something asked it to be. The narrator gently pulls the audience closer. This is not about magic. It is about limits. Limits of how much reality can exist without being defined. The scientist noticed something else. The moment he expected a certain result, he paid more attention, measured more carefully. Expectation led to observation. Observation led to outcome. The line between cause and effect began to blur. He realized that the universe was not a quiet stage where events simply happened. It was more like a conversation. A question was asked, reality answered. And the way the question was asked mattered. As the night grew quiet again, the scientist stared at the final results. He understood now why this idea frightened people, because it suggested that certainty was an illusion, that beneath everything solid and familiar, there was uncertainty, waiting for someone to look. The part ends with a silent thought. If the universe behaves differently when observed, then observation is not just seeing, it is participation, and the deeper question remains, who or what is the universe waiting for? The scientist could no longer ignore one idea. The observer was not just a machine, it was also a mind. He began to look beyond physics, into psychology, into neuroscience, into the study of awareness itself. For years, science had treated consciousness as a side effect, something that appeared after the real work was done. But now it felt central. He noticed something familiar. People behave differently when they know they are being watched. A child acts calmer. A speaker chooses words more carefully. Observation changes behavior. This was not strange. It was human. But what if the universe worked in a similar way? The scientist wondered if attention itself had weight, not physical weight, but influence. In the lab, machines recorded data, but humans decided what to measure, when to measure, and how to interpret. The result, the mind was always present, quietly shaping the experiment. The narrator gently explains, every experiment begins with a question, and questions come from minds. Without a question, there is no measurement. Without measurement, there is no result. The scientist started to see a pattern. Consciousness did not push particles around, but it decided what reality was allowed to show. Possibility existed everywhere, but attention narrowed it. He read studies about perception, about how the brain filters reality, how it selects some signals and ignores others. The world humans experience is not the full world. It is a version, a story the brain tells itself. This idea disturbed him. If the mind already shapes human reality, then the observer effect might be part of something much larger. Maybe reality has always been shaped by observation, not just in labs, but in daily life. The scientist thought about choices. When someone focuses on fear, the world feels dangerous. When someone focuses on hope, the same world feels open. Nothing external changes, yet everything feels different. The narrator pauses here, because this is the bridge between science and consciousness. If attention shapes experience, then awareness is not passive, it is creative. The scientist returned to the experiment with a new mindset. He noticed how his own expectations guided his actions, which settings he adjusted, which data he trusted. The observer was part of the system. He realized something subtle but powerful. The universe does not present all possibilities at once. It responds to focus, like a spotlight in the dark. Attention reveals one thing while hiding another. The scientist felt a strange sense of responsibility. If observation matters, then awareness matters. This idea made him uneasy, but also curious. because it suggested that meaning is not added after reality appears. Meaning may be built into the act of observing itself. The narrator draws the audience closer. This does not mean thoughts magically control the universe. It means reality and awareness are linked. Two sides of the same process. The scientist closed his notebook slowly. He understood now that the observer effect was not just about particles. It was about the relationship between mind and world. And once that relationship is seen, it cannot be unseen. The part ends with a quiet realization. If the mind plays a role in shaping reality, then understanding consciousness may be just as important as understanding matter. And the biggest mystery is no longer what the universe is made of, but who is doing the observing. The scientist now faced a new problem. If observation shapes reality, then what does that mean for choice? He had always believed in free will, the idea that people make decisions freely, that choices come from within. But the observer effect made him question this. He began to wonder, does observing a choice change the choice itself? The moment a person becomes aware of a decision, that decision feels different, more deliberate, more controlled. Yet before awareness, the mind is already moving, already leaning, already deciding. The scientists read about brain experiments, studies showing that the brain prepares actions before people feel they choose. The body moves first, awareness follows. This unsettled him. If choices begin before conscious thought, then what role does awareness play? The narrator guides the audience gently. Perhaps free will is not about creating choices, but about observing them, and in observing them, shaping their outcome. The scientist thought about the lab again. Particles exist as many possibilities. Until observation forces one path, what if human choices work the same way? Many possible futures exist, but attention collapses them into one. The scientist noticed this in himself. When he avoided thinking about a decision, life seemed random, uncontrolled, but when he focused, when he became fully aware, events felt aligned, intentional. The narrator pauses, because this is uncomfortable. If awareness shapes outcomes, then ignoring choices is also a choice. The scientists realized that freedom might not mean total control. It might mean responsibility. Responsibility for where attention is placed. He questioned the idea of control itself. Control suggests force, but observation suggests influence. A gentle push, not a command. The universe did not feel like a machine anymore. It felt like a field of options, sensitive to focus. The scientist felt both small and important. Small because he was not fully in control. Important because his awareness mattered. The narrator draws a careful line. This does not remove meaning from life. It deepens it. If choices are shaped by attention, then awareness is the true act of freedom. The scientist sat quietly with this idea, letting it settle. Free will was not an illusion, but it was not what he thought it was. It was not about forcing reality to obey. It was about noticing what is happening and choosing where to look. The part ends with a lingering question. If awareness shapes choices, and choices shape reality, then how much of your life is guided by attention, and how much is left unseen? The scientist began to think beyond his own life, beyond the lab, beyond human minds. If observation shapes reality, then when did it begin? He turned to old ideas, ancient philosophy, forgotten questions that sounded strangely modern. Some thinkers believed that reality exists only when it is experienced, that without awareness, the universe is incomplete. Others believed the world is mental at its core, that matter is not primary, but secondary. The scientists felt a quiet shock. These ideas were thousands of years old, yet they echoed modern physics. The narrator explains gently. Science did not create these questions, it rediscovered them. The scientists read about theories suggesting that the universe needs observers to fully exist, that without observation, reality remains unfinished. This idea felt both beautiful and unsettling. If true, then consciousness is not an accident. It is essential. The scientists imagined the early universe. No stars, no planets, no life, only energy and possibility. Was the universe waiting, not for humans, but for awareness itself? Some theories suggested that interaction alone was enough. Particles observing particles, fields interacting with fields. But others argued that information matters, that meaning matters. The scientists struggled with this, because meaning is not something machines understand, only minds do. He realized that observation is not just measurement, it is recognition. To observe is to notice that something exists. The narrator slows the pace, because this changes the story of reality. If the universe needs observers, then life is not a side effect of physics, it is a continuation of it. The scientist felt a sense of connection, as if he were not standing outside the universe, but inside it, helping it know itself. This thought was overwhelming. It suggested that every act of awareness, every moment of attention, completes reality in some small way. The scientist looked around the lab, the walls, the lights, the quiet hum of machines. Were these things real without awareness, or only potential? The narrator does not answer, because no one truly knows, but the question itself has power. The scientist understood why this idea mattered. If reality needs observers, then consciousness is not rare or meaningless. It is central. The part ends with a quiet sense of awe. The universe may not be something that simply exists. It may be something that is constantly becoming. And awareness may be the force that allows it to be seen. The scientist no longer felt the need to search for final answers. What mattered now were the questions. He understood that the observer effect was not just a strange rule of physics. It was a mirror, a way for the universe to reflect on itself. The narrator slowly turns the focus outward, away from the lab, away from equations, toward the listener. Every day, people observe without realizing it. They choose what to notice, what to ignore, what to focus on, and in doing so, they shape their experience of reality. The scientist thought about ordinary moments, a conversation, a decision, a quiet thought before sleep. Each moment feels fixed, but beneath it, there are many possible paths. Attention selects one. The narrator explains gently, this does not mean reality is fake. It means reality is interactive. It responds, not just to action, but to awareness. The scientist realized that he was not separate from the universe he studied. His thoughts, his questions, his attention, all were part of the same system. This idea brought him peace, because it removed the feeling of being small and powerless. He did not control the universe, but he participated in it. The narrator lets this idea settle. Participation is not dominance, it is relationship. To observe is to be involved. The scientist began to live differently. He paid closer attention. He listened more carefully. He chose his focus with intention, not because it gave him control, but because it gave him meaning. The universe felt less like a cold machine, and more like a shared process. The narrator returns to the central thought. If observation changes reality, then awareness is never neutral. Every moment of attention matters. The scientist looked up at the night sky. Stars burning across vast distances, light reaching his eyes after millions of years. In that moment, the universe was not just out there, it was happening here, between observer and observed. The story closes with a quiet invitation, not to believe, but to notice. Because the moment you realize you are observing reality, reality may already be responding. And the final question remains. If awareness helps shape the universe, what kind of universe are you creating with your attention?